Welcome back to the Placeholder Podcast, everybody. I am Kaylee Fretz. This week on the pod, is Wout van Aert actually going to win the Giro d'Italia? Are the Saudis coming for cycling just like they came for golf and soccer? And how much does Nairo Quintana have left to give? Kit Nicholson, happy Halloween. What are you going as? What are you trick-or-treating as tonight?
I am not to either.
Unfortunately, that's not an answer. You're going to need to pick something.
Okay, maybe then I'm going as a misanthrope, sitting in the dark.
That sounds great. Ronan, what are you going as? I know you're going trick-or-treating.
Well, for some reason my hair keeps reverting to a mohawk today. I'm not sure what's going on there, but if it would sit the right way, I might go as Woody. That's my usual.
Classic.
I mean, it's you just walk outside and you're good to go. Yeah.
Put a cowboy hat on.
Yep.
Pair of boots.
I'm going as a cow because my 2-year-old was going as a cow, and so we're going as a flock of cows.
Flock of cows.
A herd of cows? A herd of cows.
The image in my head of a flock of cows is quite entertaining.
Flying cows, is it?
Flying cows.
It's going to be particularly entertaining because my wife is like 7.5 months pregnant and is going to have a big udder sticking off of her belly. It's going to just be a real look.
Amazing.
It's going to be fantastic.
I look forward to the pictures.
Happy Halloween, everybody. I know you're getting this a day later, but we're recording it on Halloween, so is what it is. Let's get into today's show. All right, we're going to kick it off with this Wout van Aert news, which actually broke. I say broke. It's only semi-confirmed here. Gazzetta dello Sport, which is, to be fair, probably the best source of information about anything Giro related. They put out a report saying that Wout van Aert is not only racing the Giro, but wants to win the Giro, ride GC at the Giro. This hasn't been confirmed anywhere else. They won't actually sort of officially announce whether this is true until what's very likely the Jumbo sort of team presentation thing that they do at the end of December. So we won't really know until then. And I think, obviously we won't really know until just ahead of the Giro, depending on probably how his classic season goes.
No, we know.
But Ronan knows already. So Ronan, what are your thoughts on this?
This is not happening. No chance. No, I'm not even going to attempt to sit on the fence on this one. I'm fully falling on the side of this is not happening.
What do you mean he's not going to go to the Giro, or he's not going to try and win it?
He's not going to the Giro to ride GC. Yeah. He may well go to the Giro. And the Gazzetta article has actually since disappeared, I believe. So
yes,
always a good sign for quality reporting.
Wheeler Flits have reported on it. They had seen it before it disappeared, but now it may well be temporarily down, maybe entirely down. Not sure.
Was it print only? Because that sometimes happens.
Wow, in 2023, and it's reflective of the Italian fans of cycling, as we spoke about a few weeks ago with Passato, all old men. So maybe they aren't on their iPads. Maybe they are checking the pink newspaper.
Generally, the story will show up at some point online, but sometimes they leave it for the newspaper. Yeah, I guess they're trying to get people to pick up the newspapers in the morning, right? But Ronan, explain to me why you're extremely confident in this, and it's not a question of reporting. You haven't gone and called somebody up that told you this. You've just done the analysis, and you think it's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, well, Van Aert is Belgian. He's a classic specialist. He every year looks certain to win either Flanders or Roubaix or both, and yet still has won neither. And I just don't see him giving up that chance or trying to sort of take a victory in one of those two events to chase. I think the report was top 5 in GC at the Giro. He's not a top 5 person. He's a win or give it to a teammate or not be in contention at all kind of guy. And I just don't think both are possible. The proximity between the classic season and the Giro means that you can't make that transformation that Wout seemingly makes between classics and Tour de France. While the Giro is happening,
by transformation, you mean lose 5 kilos and...
Yeah, well, I mean, even just a different type of fitness and training. We kind of briefly delved into this during the Performance Process podcast that we recorded a couple of weeks ago with Jumbo-Visma's head of performance, Matthew Heibor. Basically, from what I understand, while the Giro is happening, Wout is doing very different type of training and a lot of altitude. And for him to do that in preparation for the Giro would mean skipping the classics. I just don't see him doing just yet.
Let's kind of lay out the calendar that Gazzetta laid out, which was somehow... We'll ignore whether this is actually possible or not, but this is what was laid out. Race the classics, focus on Flanders and Roubaix just like he always would. Somehow flip it around, get to the Giro, focus on the Giro, ride for GC at the Giro, who knows? And then the reason for this is because he would not race the Tour de France. He would use that time to recover and then build and spend all of July at altitude, sounds like, and then show up on July 27th which is the Olympic time trial, try to win that. And then I think the road race is on the 4th or something like that. And so try to win that on August 4th. That is essentially the timeline that has been laid out as the option here. As you're intimating, Ronan, we see some problems with the way that this has been sort of constructed.
Is next year a leap year? And is it different in other years in that there's an extra month rather than an extra day? Because I don't otherwise see how you can be, in peak form for classic season and Giro and even 68 kilometers of time trialing. It's just such a different type of fitness. The fitness is even the wrong word. Just physiology required for. I'm not saying Wout might never do this. We've seen the likes of Geraint Thomas do it previously. As good as Geraint Thomas was at transforming himself from a classics rider, winning the likes of E3 and that, to winning the Tour de France. He was not doing those things in the same year, and that was the classics and the Tour, which are further apart. The classics and the Giro. I mean, if he's going to do that, why not just go win the Tour and win the Olympics also, and then the World Championships, and then sure the cyclocross and the gravel worlds and the track worlds. And I mean, if you're going to the Olympics, why not do the Olympic road race, time trial, track? No,
high dive.
It's not happening.
Ping pong.
Yeah, of all the riders in the peloton, I wouldn't put Wout van Aert. I wouldn't put it past him. This news first sort of landed, well, a version of it anyway, that Wout might do the Giro end of last week or early this weekend. When all the riders are over in Singapore pretending to race, they start talking about their targets for next year. It was around that sort of time when it was posited that Van Aert might actually go to the Giro. He's never done a Grand Tour other than the Tour. It's also a terrain that there are lots of stages that he could go for. This is very much if a tree falls in the forest sort of statement. But when I saw Wout van Aert going to the Giro and acknowledging that it is cycling silly season and knowing that the Giro is much less loaded with the long climbs, I thought, Van Aert's going to go for the overall. And I thought I was being ridiculous, but at the same time that there was a fair chance it might be a thought in a mind somewhere in the Visma, Lisa Bike, whatever they're going to be called, brain trust.
Let's do the counter argument. Let's just ignore what we actually think here.
Before you get into the counter argument, I do think he may well go to the Giro. I don't think he's going to go and ride for GC.
I think that's reasonable. I think it makes sense to do that, actually, because it's just the giant training block at sort of the right time of year. And yeah, it makes lots of, like, was it Abby this morning on Slack was talking about how a lot of pros are looking at doing this because anybody who's really focused on the Olympics, the Giro is way better to do than the Tour. That said, I'd put decent money on somebody from the Tour winning the Olympics anyway, because it tends to have the best riders. So anyway, come back to that. The argument in favor here is that this Giro route is very carefully tuned to suit somebody not exactly like Wout van Aert, but closer to him than almost any other Grand Tour that we've seen in recent memory. One of the only other ones that I could think of in kind of a similar vein would be like the Wiggins Tour de France, for example. But even that had a heck of a lot more climbing, like big, long climbing than this race does. This race has 5 mountain days, lots and lots of hilly days, and nearly 70 kilometers of time trialing. And so if there was a year for Wout van Aert to do a Giro, this is the year, or try to win the Giro. We'll put it all the way out there. This is the year. But I think that the consensus on this podcast is that it's not happening. It's absolutely not happening.
I think had he won Flanders or Roubaix or both already, it might be a lot more conceivable. It's just at the moment for Wout van Aert, one of the best classics riders of his generation, that is a gaping big hole in his palmarès. Being Belgian and being so good at those races, he obviously will want to fill. I don't know, I just don't see him risking a real good chance at, Holy Week for somewhat of an outsider's chance at the Giro.
Yeah, and it's not, we know that that team they love to make goals and also to knock them down pretty comprehensively. That's the sort of thing that you could see, I don't know, a Soudal Quickstep doing when they've got one really GC rider. Jumbo is, they're not going to be Jumbo next year, but whatever.
We have to call them Jumbo until the 31st of December. Okay. And then we can call them Visma.
But they're adding Matteo Jorgensen to the team. I imagine he's going there with a little bit, promises of some leadership opportunities. And this would be a good race for him. I wouldn't be surprised if we see someone like Jai Hindley turn up at the Giro. Those riders who can't match the Vingegaards and Pogacars in the high mountains, who look at this and think this is a good year, partly because all those big riders are going to go to the Tour. We know that there are going to be we hope that there are going to be some mega battles. So the Giro is going to be a weird one anyway. Wout van Aert, if it was a month later, I could conceive of Wout van Aert getting 5th on that Giro route. But like you say, Ronan, there is no way that they go, hey, you know what would be a great story if Wout van Aert comes 5th? Let's not send him to Belgium.
The other thing is, I think this conversation exists because Van Aert does so well at the Tour. But there is a heck of a difference between doing the job that he does at the Tour as well as he does it and being a Grand Tour contender at the Tour or something like that. You know, that Van Aert does an incredible job, is there day after day, well beyond when we expect him to be there. But he also has considerable chunks of the finale of stages like that at a much lower intensity than those going for GC. And you cannot overstate how much of a difference that makes over the course of 3 weeks.
You know, there's that snapshot that we can all refer to on the Hautacam when he dropped Pogačar. You know, we looked like we was about to set up Vingegaard for a massive attack, and then Wout van Aert dropped him. But when Wout van Aert was then done 3 kilometers from the top, he was overtaken by Pogačar. It's
and
like
lost
you say,
8 minutes.
And the other thing was, he was like, Pogačar and Vingegaard came to him rather than Van Aert being
same
with them and then dropping Pogačar.
Same on the Granon stage where he was in the top 10, I think, or maybe top 20, but still, you know, he was in the breakaway. That was part of the big plan. So yeah.
Should we just hit this with a conspiracy theory?
Of course. Isn't that what we're here for?
Gazzetta dello Sport is quite close to RCS in the Giro.
They want him.
Like ownership wise. I mean, this feels like something that was sort of maybe chucked in a little bit. You know, it took a grain of truth, which is that this is likely the calendar for Wout van Aert next year. He's probably going to do Classics, Giro, Break, Olympics, and it's gotten sort of turned into this superstar is going to come try to become a GC rider at the Giro, because that's a very good thing for the Giro. Like, if he actually tries this and he goes for it and he does anywhere near, you know, what he could do if it was his sole focus, then yeah, it's probably a very good thing for the Giro.
I know that we journalists as a community are not always the most honest of human beings, but it would be quite bold to say...
Excuse me?
It would be... I deliberately said as a community, I think we at Escape are very solid, reliable, trustworthy.
Credible. It's too late. You've spoiled
it. Anyway, my point is, it would be, I mean, maybe that's why it's been taken down, but they did reference the team. The team thinks that he can get a top 5, and that's what he's targeting. I mean, that is quite a good bit, that's quite a bit of fiction. It's quite a stretch.
Hybor did tell us in that podcast we did a couple of weeks ago that he's convinced if Van Aert turned his hand to anything, give him a year and he will be one of the best in the world at it, you know, in terms of cycling. It's not out of the realms of possibility. I think it's out of the realms of possibility for 2020.
Yeah, to do within a month. Yeah.
I do think he will go there and he will win stages and perhaps take the points jersey, or, you know, there's a lot he could do at the Giro. I don't see him going
he could
for
win
GC.
Loads and loads and loads and loads of stages. I'd had a quick look at the profiles, and there are so many classic style stages that he could absolutely demolish. So it could be a very good training camp with a lot of silverware. He quite likes silverware. I mean goldware, which is the word.
You've sort of hit the nail on the head. The bigger question for me with Van Aert and 2024 is, if he does win the Olympics and he does the full gold thing after that, how does that work with a silver and blue Red Bull helmet? Is he just going to target the silver medal because that will
maybe better? That's what he's been doing all along.
It always surprises me that riders put that much in, particularly male riders put that much into the Olympics, right? Like, historically, women's peloton has put a lot more emphasis on the Olympic Games, partly because for a long time there was no Tour de France. It was the peak. But on the men's side, there's been a tour. It has not been the peak. Did half of our listeners out there even remember that Carapaz won the Olympics?
Well, we spoke a lot about his bronze bike.
That's true. Was the wrong color. It's such a crapshoot because there's small teams. It's generally kind of a classic style course, so it's not just like, I'm the strongest one in the bike race, therefore I win. It's such a crapshoot. I just can't imagine putting.
If you're the
that
best
much
funded rider, you can win the London road race. But anyway, that's another. maybe that's far too specific.
We're not talking about oil investment funds just yet, Ronan. Anyway, I don't understand putting that much into it because it is one day. It's so unusual. The teams are unusual. The courses are unusual. It doesn't fit any sort of mold. Generally, it gets won by some real rando, right?
Yeah, but that's my point.
A good bike rider, but like not. It's almost never won by one of the top favorites.
But I think it's probably more valuable to the smaller cycling nations, where the Olympics is probably one of the most, if not the most, internationally broadcast sporting events. And so someone like Carapaz, obviously we know that he's already a massive celebrity back home in South America, in Ecuador. But I imagine that for those smaller teams, it gets, Olympic athletes, that's part of the lottery funding that a lot of nations use. I imagine that for the smaller nations, it's a much bigger deal than for someone like Belgium. And it's only so important for Wout van Aert, maybe because he's come second.
I'm not sure. I think it's important regardless of where you come from, because it's not a cycling specific achievement. it's like gold medal at the Olympics or any medal at the Olympics is, it means something regardless of who you're speaking to. Walk out into the street now and ask someone about the Olympics, they will know what it is. Ask them about the Tour de France, they probably know as well, but ask them about the Giro.
Definitely not.
What are you talking about, crazy person?
I'm not saying that it's not a big deal. I'm saying that it's such a crapshoot that like building an entire season around it seems like a very ill-advised investment of your own personal time and resource, right? Like Wout van Aert is going to get a better return on focusing on things that he has a much better chance of winning. Of course, I say this now, we can clip it up when he wins the Olympics this summer. It's such a, like I said, it's just such a crapshoot. I don't get it. Anyway, let's take a quick break. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to dive into, I feel like this story has popped up, 5 times since I started doing this job in around 2010. It just sort of floats around. It floats around this sport, floats around other sports. Here's what's going on. So last Thursday, I believe it was, in an exclusive report, Reuters claimed that several top teams in the Men's World Tour are exploring forming a new cycling league, including outside investors with assistance from a Big Four accounting firm and, crucially, potentially, money from the Saudis, which is something, if you follow other sports, you probably have heard quite a bit in the last couple of years. So to bring on somebody who, dove into this a little bit deeper than we have, wrote the story last week, Joe Lindsay, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here.
So, Joe, what's happening? Sum it up for me.
To the extent that anybody actually knows, this appears to be sort of the latest incarnation of what once was Velon, which once was World Series Cycling, which once was the initial Pro Tour reforms from way back in 2004 with the UCI under Hein Verbruggen. And the idea has always been to basically to rework the structure of pro road cycling, particularly the men's, what is now the World Tour, to be a more streamlined calendar, to include teams and races as more equal shareholders or stakeholders, and importantly, to kind of restructure the finances of things so that it's a bit more stable. Again, this has popped up any number of times over the past decade or more, and it's always kind of fallen apart. And I've long wondered actually if the missing ingredient was something like big time foreign investment from somebody like the Saudi sovereign wealth.
I think the big thing between when Velon was formed, for example, and what we're talking about here is that Velon, they basically take a bit of budget from each of the teams that are involved, but they're just like kind of skimming off the top. And their goal was to make money, but they've never really found a good way to do that. They're essentially a media company sort of at this point. Speaking as a media company, we can say that it's not that lucrative, and particularly if you're talking in the like tens of millions kind of range, you're gonna maybe struggle. Whereas this is we're talking about a sort of totally different level of wealth here. So for a bit of additional context, like the Saudi private investment fund PIF has purchased like a major Premier League team in Newcastle, for example, dumped a huge amount of money in there. They're spending like hundreds of millions in other places in other sports. And so it's a totally different scale than what Velon, for example, was ever going to really be able to do. But the idea is still roughly the same. Obviously, they're going to run into some roadblocks. They always have. What are the big ones? ASO, really, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like where Velon fell apart was originally they wanted to get some of the races involved and this basically this packaging and sale of media rights. And that never happened. And that's the big stumbling block here is what do the teams have of value to sell in terms of media rights, as Velon discovered on their own, even altogether, not that much. The races are where the media rights are. And the idea, generally speaking, of the current iteration, as far as I know from talking to people, is a little bit more modest than the wholesale, like Formula One style revamp that they want. Instead, what they want to start with is basically like bringing the teams and races together, sell aggregated media rights across the sport. The thinking being that there is more value there doing packaging everything together than in selling them piecemeal, and you also sort of cut the redundancy of cost. So if you're the Tour of Romandy, obviously your media rights value isn't that big, but if you package the Tour of Romandy with the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia and all this, then it rises. And the idea for the Tour is that there's this coherence where everybody's sort of all in the same package.
I would like to identify a problem. The media rights package for the Tour of Romandy is worth nothing. In fact, it's worth negative money. This is what ASO already does. right? They have purchased a number of races across the calendar. The highlight is the Tour de France. That's the one that actually makes all the money. The Tour de France is essentially what keeps Paris-Nice alive. It's what keeps the Critérium du Dauphiné alive. Those races on their own, the rights packages that would be sold would be worth maybe enough to cover the costs of the TV production, but probably not. And we've seen these numbers in public before. So if ASO is already doing this, where on earth is the extra value coming from that this project is supposed to be putting together?
And to add to that question, is part of the issue here in that in other sports where we've seen this work previously, every event is almost like on an equal level. Like every football match is worth 3 points, 1 point, or 0 point, regardless of how much you win by. They're all 90 minutes long. Every golf tournament, more or less, from my understanding, is on a similar level. Every Formula One race is worth 25 points for the winner, whereas the Tour de France being 3 weeks long and having so much prestige already will always be more prestigious than a 7-day Paris-Nice or 4-day Tour de Wallonie or whatever it might be. In combination with Kaylee's question, how do you make those two things fit together?
This is what nobody has been able to convince ASO in particular to play ball with is what's in it for them. As you mentioned, Kaylee, they already package stuff. They already lose money on Paris-Nice. And so why would they want to lose money on races that aren't theirs? The argument that has to be made and actually that has to be proved is that bundling this stuff actually increases the value overall. And that is going to be the toughest thing that they can do. I think they're probably their best option for that is with starting with Flanders Classics, which is a little bit more sort of open and progressive than RCS or ASO is about this kind of thing. If they can get Flanders Classics on board and show that the media rights value of that has actually increased, for bundling with the teams, bundling with some other races that aren't Flanders Classics in that process, then maybe that starts to make the case. But it's a really tough case to make. It's not one that anybody has managed to make before. And ASO clearly, it seems like, sees this as, why would we want to divide our pie up rather than, this could help grow the size of the pie?
I'm not going to pretend for a second that I understand what's happening besides Richard Plugger trying to be more powerful in cycling. But, the Flanders Classics thing, obviously they're one of the most successful, lucrative, entertaining packages in the sport. But isn't the reason that they work, and I mean on a business level, not anything to do with media at all? It's to do with the hospitality and the sportive and all that more sort of, I don't know, I suppose grassroots, marginal gain sort of thing rather than actually anything to do with media. Or have I completely got the wrong end of the stick?
There's a case to be made for that like a lot of what they've done that's worked is outside of the traditional media rights approach. I think what I wonder is, have they sort of reached the limit of what they can really do and innovate there? Is media rights now this big, the big piece of fruit that they can't quite reach? And they wonder, is this something that could work? To be clear, I don't have specific information to suggest that Flanders Classics has actually signed on to this deal. This is all just stuff that's floating around. But if there's a promoter or a consortium of promoters out there that would be open to something like this, Flanders Classics would be the group that I would target for sure.
It's interesting that you've sort of got opposing characters like Richard Plugge and Jonathan Vaughters, sort of potentially lined up on the same side of this thing. Vaughters, he put an op-ed on our site relatively recently that wasn't that far from this concept. Those two don't love each other. Not so much, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing. So here's the other angle on this, right? Is that at some point it's a power struggle. If you could essentially, and this will never happen, but one of the other things that Velon was always trying to do was essentially kind of unionize the teams, not like individuals, but the teams themselves, so they acted as a block. The thought was, okay, well, if you have, every single major team with every single major rider, you could essentially go to ASO and force their hand on things, because you could do major damage to their accounts if you basically said, okay, well, Jumbo, Ineos, UAE, EF, Movistar, whatever, none of us are coming to the Tour this year. But the problem is, if they all refuse to go to the Tour some year, they'd also lose their own sponsors. It's this impossible catch-22 for the teams. ASO remains in this position of really just unsurpassed power. And I think that the only thing that could shift that is if somebody showed up with enough cash to get ASO to change its tune. There's been attempts to purchase ASO before. There was, I think it was Wanda Group, 5, 6, 7 years ago was attempting to do this, or at least there were rumors of them attempting. They had approached the Amory family about this, but none of those have ever been successful. It would take a probably pretty shocking number to ever make that happen. But I mean, the Saudi investment fund can do shocking numbers quite easily. If there was ever a chance, I could see that as the path forward.
The other way to look at that is from the opposite direction, in that if you mentioned 5 or 6 of the biggest teams there who are also, at least in cycling terms, the most secure of the teams, maybe not all the ones you've listed there, but certainly some of the Ineos, for example, are pretty secure. But from the opposite end, the likes of your Arkea Samsic, your likes of your Quick Step that nearly disappeared this winter, all those smaller teams within cycling who are also still critical to the Tour de France success. If a big investor came along and said, well, we're going to protect you 10 teams, the Tour can't happen without you, and then suddenly the boycott can happen until things happen in a more evenly distributed way.
Yeah, there's no reason that World Tour has to still be the same number of teams, right? In reality, it would probably be a consortium of you probably pull 8 to 10 together, and that would be most likely enough.
One final question for Joe. Is potentially the biggest hurdle here, and maybe actually the biggest reason why also this maybe shouldn't happen, is that the way cycling currently exists with so many teams, not just World Tour, but Pro Conti and Conti level and every level, and then so many races, for at least in my head, for anything like this to actually work, it needs to be much more streamlined. And streamlined is one way of saying ditching a heck of a lot of teams, ditching a heck of a lot of events, and just keeping it to a core select number of events per season that the average, not the average actually, the new fan might be able to follow much easier, but the average fan like you and I and you know, hardcore cycling fans would actually feel like that is cycling being diluted quite a lot. We would lose some of the, like, a new fan to the sport doesn't know nor doesn't care what the World Tour of Flanders is, but for us it's maybe one of the best races of the season. Is that maybe the very reason why these things keep failing?
There's a lot to unpack there in what you guys just said, and I think, Ronan, to start with your point, and Kayla with yours, yes, that sort of instability in the sport is exactly why this stuff never works, is because for every Ineos or Jumbo that you have that's like strong enough, feels like it's strong enough to make demands of ASO, there's an Arkea Samsic out there that is not. ASO goes to those teams with the like classic union busting technique and basically says, like, if you guys do this, you're never getting in the Tour de France ever again. And Arkea says, oh, we can't do that. So they go and, like, things gradually crumble. Only thing that's going to change that dynamic is an outfit or an entity with enough money to come in and tell Arkea Samsic, tell those guys to screw off. We're going to bankroll you. Don't worry about it. You will survive. You're not existentially at risk. We can do a kind of almost like a United Auto Workers kind of approach, like is happening here in the US with the automakers, where they're basically saying, like, you strike, we have enough money to pay your salary while you strike. We will get the win. And they are. So I think, like, yeah, the presence of a PIF is the only way this is going to work. I do really wonder if now's a tremendously inauspicious time for that. The Saudis definitely have a lot going on in their part of the world right now.
The good news is Ireland now also has a sovereign wealth fund. So maybe I'll go have a conversation with Michael D and see what we can make happen.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Let's take a quick break. Welcome back, everybody. It's time for just a couple quick news hits. Kit, there's some gravel grumps over the weekend. Who are the gravel grumps, and what am I talking about?
Well, yeah, it wasn't strictly speaking over the weekend, but so we had the Tour de France route announcement middle of last week, which includes 30-something kilometers of gravel on one of the first week stages. It looks like it'll be a beautiful stage, but inevitably that has brought forth some criticism. It's not as high risk as a coupled stage, but it's that sort of idea, that sort of vibe. So Richard Plugger was one of them who said, this is unnecessary additional risk. And Remco Evenepoel said something similar, maybe with the shadow of the Giro 2021 hanging over him and that ill-fated day in Tuscany. But yeah, so they think that there's far too much risk involved in putting a gravel stage in. For goodness sake, isn't this modern cycling? It's like, it's a bit curmudgeonly and boring, in my opinion. And Tadej Pogačar thinks so too. So he was interviewed in breaks between pretending to race rickshaws with Jasper Philipsen at the Singapore Criterium this weekend. And it's no surprise that Pogačar is quite excited about the idea of gravel, though he did acknowledge that he won't race it like Strade Bianche. It'll be a much more defensive day out, which is maybe, that word defensive is always a bit worrying. Pogačar, presented with that idea of, is it too much risk? He just said, we always take risks in cycling. And I think he's hit the nail on the head there. There's a risk in descending a mountain. There's a risk of punctures on a long, flat stage.
I feel like Pluga using the word risk is he's not using that word correctly, right? Like what he's actually talking about is we can't control this, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he doesn't like. So two different things. Gravel in the Tour is fun. Cobbles in the Tour are fun. It's an entertainment product. It's not designed so that you can break it down with math and win it. Yeah, I think gravel in the Tour de France is a good thing. So we say poo-poo to you, Remco and Richard Pluga.
I'm not even going to go as far as to say if it's a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing.
It's just a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's bike race.
It's just part of the bike race.
All right. Also on the list for today, Ineos is finally padding out their team. We've got a whole bunch of sort of re-signings and signings. And if you recall, we've talked quite a bit about this and how they had like 8 people like a month ago, and then they had 12 or something as of last week. And they appear to they're going to have an actual bicycle team.
And they've signed a whippersnapper, an American, AJ August.
Won the Junior Tour of Ireland this year.
Yeah,
Did he really?
Recognize the name.
He's apparently an enormous talent. I've heard sort of like rumors of him for half a decade now, and he's 19 or 18 or something like that, something incredibly young. And I like the idea of signing straight from Hot Tubes to Ineos. Hot Tubes is his previous team, and it's an incredible development team in sort of the eastern half of the United States is where most of those riders come from. But it's not like he's coming from the Jumbo development team to Jumbo kind of thing. That sort of pathway. He's coming straight out of a team that's basically mostly racing East Coast U.S. American events, bit in Europe with the U.S. national team, etc. But it's a healthy, large jump. But I think that he's got the talent to excel.
And Magnus Sheffield is an alumnus, no?
Like a huge number of American pros rode for Hot Tubes.
I meant the Ineos connection.
Who's still there? Absolutely. I think Lawson Craddock rode for them back in the day. There's tons and tons of Americans that came up through that program. They do fantastic work. It's them and Action that are the two kind of big ones, and Action takes more international riders, whereas Hot Tubes is really the sort of the American version of that.
Correction for myself. It was last year. He won the Junior.
Nairo Quintana is back. Nairo Quintana has signed a contract with Movistar. How do we feel about this?
So I wrote this news up at the weekend, and I caught myself thinking, surely this was obvious. First of all, he's desperate to get onto a team, and there are plenty of teams desperate for GC rider. But also, Movistar is hilariously unpredictable, enigmatic. So we get to add Quintana back to their ranks. It felt like such an obvious bit of news that we really should have seen coming, and that will provide endless entertainment and question marks for the coming season.
I think it's just a sign that Movistar are still failing to adapt to modern racing or whatever. Like, they've tried this before, it didn't work. They let him leave, let Landa leave. Valverde was always eventually going to retire, and now it's like they've tried with Mas and let's go back and try that old thing that we tried before again and give that another go. Maybe we could have done that better. It's like, not even getting into all the question marks whether Quintana should be back or not. I don't know, but I think it's just a bad image for Movistar.
It's another interesting point though, because he signs. Well, he'll start racing for his new team the day that Tramadol is officially added to the banned substances list.
Is that 1st of January?
So from 1st January 2024, this was reported last year that they were educating themselves in the sport. WADA was about Tramadol and its effects and why it was bad, but it's now definitely coming into effect on January 1st.
So the riders and teams educated themselves for like 15 years ago, and WADA just educated themselves this year.
Well, I think I'm supposed to be the Nairo Quintana fanboy on this podcast, so I'm going to stick with it. I'm happy to see him back. Tramadol, Schmabadol, and no, not kidding.
Question is, like, if it's happened, why didn't it happen in like February or something? Why did they wait till the end of the year? Like, I'm not saying it should have, but it's just like, what has changed now that all year they didn't sign him, and now they think, okay, let's sign him? Is it like enough time has passed, or? Well,
he's been courted apparently by half the peloton.
He told us in January, I will definitely be racing World Tour this year. Like,
yes.
And I don't know, unless he's playing Pro Cycling Manager or something on his PC, I don't know how he was doing that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they also said, no, sorry, mate, we can't do that again. But now that they're kind of floundering at the bottom of the relegation table, they need to have points by the end of next year. This is incredibly boring to be talking about this again. But it's probably, he'll go and win some small GC races, 2.1, and get a couple of stage wins somewhere.
So they had the likes of Matteo Jorgensen, who's buying his own aero bars, paying for his own altitude training camps, and instead of like focusing on maintaining and keeping riders like that and giving them the best chance possible to convert Paris-Nice top 10s into Paris-Nice victories at some point, they're going to go and like sign the closest thing to Valverde that still exists this side
and
of
he's
gravel.
only close to him because he's sat next to him on the bus.
It just beggars belief.
All right, that's enough Quintana. I absolutely flat out refuse to get dragged into a promotion relegation points discussion.
Yeah, no, I turned my own blood cold by just mentioning that. So.
Absolutely not. We'll save that for boring points of next year's season.
2 years from now.
2 years from now. Well, end of next year we'll probably start talking.
It'll start becoming irrelevant at the end of next year. Yeah.
Yep. And I do think that you're right in that teams are already thinking about it, or at least they should be. Welcome back, everybody. It's time for Weekly Pain. Current standings as of the week of Halloween, October 31st. We have Dane and Johnny tied for first with 7 points, Kit with 6, Ian with 4, Ronan with 5. It's still pretty tight at the top of the table. Today, an opportunity, obviously, for either Kit or Ronan to make serious headway. Kit, if you win, you'll be well off the front, and Ronan, you could also take the lead with a victory today.
Now he's excited.
Proverbial 6-pointer in our hands.
we have 2 games for you. We're going to go back and forth on this one, and we're going to go down the list of most victories for a men's World Tour team. We're going to start with Ronan because Kit is currently in the lead.
The first one's pretty easy, and Jumbo-Visma. Like, nobody else won 72 races this year, did they? Is it 72?
It is 69. This is according to Pro Cycling Stats. I don't know where this number comes from.
You didn't ask me for the number. You just asked me for the order.
Order's fine. No, you still got it right. Kit, I need number 2. What was the second most victorious team? And that wasn't a hint.
Well, I look very stupid if I get this wrong now, but UAE Team Emirates?
You are correct with 57. Ronan, back over to you. What was third? Dun, dun, dun.
Quick Step?
Quick Step was third. I'm impressed.
Surely these are just like easy guesses so far.
Kit, who was fourth? Who had the 4th most victories? It is tight between 4th and 5th.
I'm going to say Alpecin de Koning.
It's wrong. Unfortunately, you're off by 1 victory because Ineos had 36 and Alpecin de Koning had 35. Point goes to Ronan.
Can you give us the rest of the list just quickly?
I can give you the rest of the list. So we've got Jumbo, UAE, Soudal, Ineos, Alpecin de Koning in the top 5, followed by Little Trek with 27, EF with 26, Bora Hansgrohe with 23, Lotto Destiny with 21, Intermarché, Groupama, Bahrain, Jayco, Movistar, Astana, Uno X, Cofidis, and then we get down into whatever.
Cofidis is not doing well, are they? Anyway.
Cofidis has the same number as Crabbe, Toiture, CC Chevigny Jr.
Oh, wow.
So again, I'm not talking about World Tour victories here. I was talking about victories.
No, but they're a World Tour team.
Yeah. All right. Time for round 2. I am looking for a nation. You're going to give me a nation. And I'm looking for the top 10 nations in terms of total stage victories in Grand Tours since 2010. There's a ranking. I need the top 10. And for this one, we'll start with you, Kit. Who's in the top 10? What countries are in the top 10?
Belgium.
Correct. 6th. Ronan?
Britain?
2nd.
I think
suddenly forgotten all names of all countries on the planet.
I'm frantically writing here.
Don't know what to pluck out of my brain. We'll go...
There's quite a few obvious ones left.
Yeah.
Right?
The Netherlands.
Yes. 10th.
Oh, that's...
Barely made it.
Italy?
Number 1. 118.
Because of the Giro, probably.
Yeah.
Spain.
I shouldn't have said because of the Giro, because that
just... Correct. 4th.
It's also just the era of Valverde, so it's like...
Yeah.
You know. And Contador.
Ronan?
France?
France is 3rd. A couple left.
Colombia?
Nicely done. 9th.
Wow.
Ronan?
Slovenia?
8th. There are 2 left in the top 10. If we get them all, I guess we go to the top 15.
Okay.
Or no, we can tie. I always forget we can tie. We could tie.
Germany.
Germany is one of the remaining two. I think there's
Greipel and Kittel.
Yeah, I think there's one left.
There's so many countries listed down here. I was confident of winning this one, but the only one that I've got left here written down that we haven't said is Australia.
You got them all.
Oh, yes.
You got them all.
Teamwork makes a draw. But yeah, that was good. I'm impressed with us.
Well, but a draw
duds.
in this...
That's quite good going, I think.
A draw in this game means that...
Oh, yeah, that's no good. Ronan wins. That's cool.
The Ronan, you take the victory. You take the overall victory today. Congratulations to Ronan.
I kind of feel like I stole this one because obviously we drew the second question, but the first question, had it come to me next, I was going to say Trek. I can't remember who you said. Alpecin.
I said Alpecin.
And then there was, who was actually next was...
Ineos. No, it was Ineos and Alpecin were basically tied.
But
whereas I was going to say Trek.
If I'd had third pick, I would have said Alpecin because I thought, because Philipsen's the most winning rider of the season, I would have said Alpecin. So you win fair and square, I think.
For sure.
I'll not fight you for crediting me with a fair one.
Ronan, that has put you into first place overall with 8 points.
What a comeback, hey.
Johnny and Dane are currently tied for second with 7, followed by Kit with 6, followed by Ian, who we never let on the podcast, with 4. All right. It's time for us to wrap up today. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Placeholder Podcast. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.